President Trump's last-ditch effort to stay in office was dealt a decisive blow tonight by the Supreme Court. The court denied a bid to overturn election results in Pennsylvania. CBS's Ed O'Keefe is in Wilmington, Delaware tonight. Good evening, Ed.
Good evening, Nora. That's right. The Supreme Court blocking one of the president's last paths to possibly overturning the election results. The High Court, in a one-sentence decision, rejected attempts by the president's supporters in Pennsylvania to toss out most of the state's mail-in ballots. They argued they were unlawful. The decision comes as the president and the president-elect held dueling events today on the pandemic.
And I'm going to speak directly to the American people and say what I'm saying now. We need your help.
President-elect Joe Biden today laying out his three-point plan to fight the pandemic as soon as he enters office, urging people to wear masks for 100 days, getting kids safely back to school, and carrying out 100 million COVID vaccinations.
100 million COVID vaccine shots into the arms of the American people in the first 100 days.
Mr. Biden warned the current administration's vaccination plan will fall short without additional funding.
There's a real chance that after an early round of vaccinations, the effort will slow and stall.
Dr. Anthony Fauci, who Biden has tapped as his chief medical advisor, helped devise the new plan and gave the president-elect credit for leaving politics out of it.
I believe, as you do, that in the fight against this pandemic, we must lead with science.
Fauci skipped a vaccine summit hosted by President Trump today, which featured no representatives from vaccine manufacturers. And members of the incoming Biden administration, who will handle much of the distribution, also were not invited.
Every American who wants the vaccine will be able to get the vaccine.
Mr. Trump continued to insist he won the election.
Hopefully the next administration will be the Trump administration.
Even though nearly all 50 states have certified their results, officially giving Mr. Biden an electoral college victory. Republican leaders on Capitol Hill still refuse to accept the result, today blocking the committee planning the inauguration from recognizing Mr. Biden as the president-elect. The president's legal team is vowing to fight on, despite mounting courtroom losses, and its two top attorneys, Rudy Giuliani and Jenna Ellis, testing positive for COVID-19.
Your question is...
Meanwhile, CBS News has learned that outgoing Alabama Senator Doug Jones remains a top contender to serve as Mr. Biden's first attorney general. And we've learned tonight that he plans to nominate Marcia Fudge, an Ohio congresswoman, to lead the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Nora?
Ed O'Keefe, thank you.
The White House has already hosted 10 holiday parties, with 10 more in the works, some with more than 200 people. Last Friday, the president's lawyer, Jenna Ellis, attended one of the parties inside the White House. And today, we confirmed Ellis has COVID-19.
Why are you modeling a different behavior to the American people than what your scientists tell us?
Well, they're Christmas parties, and frankly, we've reduced the number very substantially, as you know.
Today, the president hosting a summit at the White House to take credit for COVID vaccines. It comes 24 hours after we learned the administration passed on buying any more than 100 million doses from Pfizer. Now, Pfizer may not be able to provide more doses to the U.S. before June. Today, Trump signing an executive order saying doses obtained by the U.S. should go to Americans first. But on GMA this morning, even the head of the Trump administration's Operation Warp Speed couldn't explain what it means.
Frankly, I don't know. And frankly, I'm staying out of this. I can't comment. I literally don't know.
But you're the chief science advisor for Operation Warp Speed.
Our work is rolling. We have plans. We feel that we can deliver the vaccines as needed. So I don't know exactly what this order is about.
Now, members of the Biden team were not invited to that White House summit today, and when asked why not, President Trump reverted back to his false claims about the election, insisting that he won several swing states and saying it's not clear who the next president will be. Of course, that is not true, and it is clear Joe Biden will be the next president. David.
All right, Mary Bruce. North, and we'll all get back into the 50s for highs tomorrow, but then further west we have a better shot of getting back to the 60s once more. Thursday, a little bit cooler, low to mid-30s, and then by the afternoon, we get back to the 40s, which is still above normal, but
Pennsylvania filing about one specific element. There is another Pennsylvania case that is still active and other legal challenges, but this was seen by Trump supporters as a big one for the Supreme Court to possibly take up. In fact, Ted Cruz wanted to argue this case. Let's bring in our panel. Bill Bennett, former Education Secretary and host of the Bill Bennett Show podcast, Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief at USA Today, and Guy Benson, political editor at townhall.com, the host of the Guy Benson Show on Fox News Radio. Guy, earlier in the show, you heard Jonathan Turley, his assessment of what this means for the legal challenges, essentially saying it signals to him that the Supreme Court really doesn't want to get into this.
Yeah, the fact that there were no dissents noted in this decision suggests that all 9 justices, at least on this case, said, no thank you. As you mentioned, Brett, there are still a few irons in the fire, legally speaking, but those options seem to be dwindling. The other active Pennsylvania case that you mentioned, my understanding is it's about a challenge of about 9,000 ballots, which is far less than the margin would need to be to overturn the result in that state of Pennsylvania. Then there's a Texas lawsuit that is getting pretty widely panned by legal analysts across the board. So it's not over until all of these cases are resolved, but as you suggested, this was a big one today, not unexpected, but still significant.
Bill?
Yeah, well, the path narrows. I think the guy's right, but those 2 cases are still out there. Sometimes when the court doesn't take a case, you don't have the opportunity for dissenting votes. There may be someone disagreed. Maybe you're waiting for this broader stroke Texas case and the other case. But yeah, it's not good news for the challenges. By the way, the numbers that matter here are not the numbers, the difference between Democrat and Republican votes in any single state. What matters here is whether there was a systematic fiddling with the machines or with the whole approach, which would affect many states, which is what the Texas challenge is about. We'll see.
You know, Susan, today was really dominated at the White House with this vaccine summit, which no matter what side you're on, is really impressive as far as the logistics to be able to hit this mark before the end of the year. And the question is whether President Trump is going to get credit for it.
Well, President Trump tried to take credit for today, and it is a huge achievement. It's an achievement for the administration, for the scientists involved, for the companies. It's something that we're all grateful for, but it was really striking when you contrasted kind of a split screen today where you had President Trump talking about the success of the vaccine, great days ahead in the spring. You had Joe Biden almost simultaneously unveiling his health team and talking about the difficult weeks ahead in December, in January, and February, before most Americans will have gotten the vaccine. And while the number of coronavirus cases continues to rise and rise, the death toll just gets bigger. His focus is on bracing people for tough times. President Trump's focus was on taking credit, deservedly so, for the vaccines.
You know, Guy, speaking of that, the split
24-hour, Anna could only imagine a comfortable night's sleep without.
These are real people.
Following, the House of Representatives has just passed a $740 billion defense spending bill. President Trump has pledged to veto the bill, but it passed the chamber overwhelmingly with a veto-proof majority. The Senate still needs to vote on the legislation. It is expected to pass there overwhelmingly as well. Meanwhile, there's more breaking news we're following. The president-elect has just announced that retired General Lloyd Austin, this is an official announcement, will be his pick to become the next defense secretary. CNN.
Tonight, the moment the world has been waiting for, the first shots given of a clinically approved COVID vaccine. A 90-year-old grandmother making history, the very first person to receive Pfizer's vaccine inside the hospital for what the UK is calling V-Day. Healthcare workers lining up there as the U.S. still awaits emergency use approval. But could that approval come this week? The countdown and the FDA's first report on Pfizer's vaccine, the effectiveness after just the first of 2 shots, and how the White House is responding to a report it turned down an offer to buy millions more doses. Hospitals at the breaking point as the U.S. tops 15 million cases, ICU beds running out, a field hospital activated in a parking garage. President-elect Joe Biden's new vaccine pledge, 100 million doses in his first 100 days, but warns of challenges. The Army investigation and the dramatic action taken today after a Fort Hood soldier was brutally murdered. Our year-long NBC News investigation into prescriptions by mail, what we found, and could it be putting lives at risk? And the disturbing new FBI warning on those Ring and Nest cameras.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening, and now it finally begins. Through the pain, loss, and tears of the worst days of the pandemic, tonight we're now on what most experts believe is the long road back from the pandemic. It starts in the UK, where the first vaccinations are underway of a clinically proven COVID vaccine, the same vaccine that could be in use here in the U.S. sometime this month. And it comes on the day we learn that vaccine may be far more effective than we imagine.
After this.
It's a justice of the Supreme Court or a number of justices of the Supreme Court. Let's see if they have the courage to do what everybody in this country knows is right.
Today was also the so-called safe harbor deadline for states to certify election results and guarantee that Congress accepts their electoral vote tallies. Only Wisconsin missed the deadline. The push for pandemic economic relief is hung up on disagreements over aid for state and local governments and over liability protections for businesses. Today, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell proposed dropping those issues for now and passing jobless benefits and renter protections. Democratic leaders accused McConnell of obstruction. The House of Representatives advanced a sweeping defense funding bill despite a veto threat. President Trump has demanded that unrelated language be in there to strip the big social media companies of legal liability protection. And he opposes changing the name of military bases that honor Confederate leaders. A veto could block a 3% pay raise for U.S. troops. The U.S. Army has fired or suspended 14 officers and soldiers at Fort Hood, Texas, over failures to stop extreme violence in the ranks. Today's report said that the killing of Specialist Vanessa Guillen exposed a pattern of sexual harassment, assault, and even murder.
This idiot is trying to do in suing these states to get in front of the Supreme Court. The reality of it is you lost. And as the good mayor said, we've all lost campaigns. So what do? We pick ourselves up and we get ready for the next one. If Donald Trump wants to be president of the United States, shut this crap down, figure out what you did wrong. We know what you did wrong. It's called COVID and a whole lot of other stuff. And then come back in 2024. But you don't get a do-over here. You're not going to be handed a second place prize. You're not even going to be given a first place prize. Just pack your stuff up and move on. But to have other Republicans continue to participate in this is probably the greatest offense, because they know what the end game is here. Donald Trump leaves the White House on January 20th, and everything they do between now and then in this regard undermines the integrity of this process and certainly the confidence of the American people in it.
But Chairman Steele, what you say, everything that you say is right, true, and fair. The president should move on, and folks should recognize that. But there are followers of the president who don't want to move on. I don't know if you saw this, but there's the Arizona GOP sent out a tweet that promotes giving your life to the fight for Trump. You see it right there. I'm willing to give my life for this fight. And the Arizona GOP quote tweets that. He is, are you? Chairman Steele.
I can answer that.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I ain't. And a whole lot of Americans aren't that stupid. This is not a cult. And if somebody wants to go sit in the closet with, whatever, then go do that. That's on you. I can't help. Again, I've said it many, many times before. We need to stop coddling stupid. We need to stop pretending like these people actually matter in this process. But here's the dangerous part, and this I do take away from that, is somebody could get hurt. Somebody could get killed because of what Republicans who are promoting and pushing this nonsense, and the president himself is out there saying at these lame rallies that, this matters. It doesn't matter. He lost the election. And here's the bottom line. The seedbed is being laid down for Republicans in future elections. Heed this, not just at the presidential level, but now at your local races. You're setting up a challenge in the future against everything you're doing. It's going to come back to haunt you when somebody decides you weren't legitimately elected as the United States Senator, the Congressman, or the dog catcher. you're opening a Pandora's box that you have no control over, because what goes down today will come back up at you tomorrow.
Right. Mayor Bottoms, before we go, I have to ask you about this headline that we have at NBC News. Georgia counties cut back early voting sites ahead of Senate runoffs, alarming voting rights advocates. 4 of the 10 most populous counties in Georgia are reducing the number of locations where people can vote early in the state's Senate runoff races. Cobb County, the state's 3rd most populous. Election officials have announced 5 early voting locations, fewer than half of the 11 used for early voting ahead of last month's general election. The Senate runoff elections are January 5th. Your reaction to the news in that story, and how will that really impact voter turnout?
It's deeply concerning, but what I've said all along is that we can't rely on the Republicans in this state to implode. We can't. We've got to show up and vote. We've got to show up and vote in record numbers. And so often people don't come back to runoff elections. Many people don't even understand the concept of a runoff election. It's the reason that we are encouraging people, we're educating people, and we're telling people go and vote early. Clearly, there is an attempt to make it even more difficult in the state of Georgia to vote. But we can't use that as an excuse. What really concerned me, when I look at the numbers from the November election, we had a record turnout in the state. Nearly 5 million people turned out to vote. But nearly 1 million African Americans who were eligible to vote did not show up and vote in November. So we've got to continue to make the case as to why elections matter, why this runoff is so important, to have the opportunity to send
is no justifying or...
That's not what's happening with hydroxychloroquine. We actually have evidence. We've done high-quality studies. Hydroxychloroquine doesn't work. So things like this are really just misinformation, trying to confuse the American people. Hydroxychloroquine is not part of the solution right now. We know what it is, and I wish we would focus on mask wearing, distancing, testing, and getting to vaccines.
All right. Thank you all three very much. And next, President Trump stepping up his attacks on Georgia's Republican lieutenant governor, calling him too dumb or corrupt, all because he won't support Trump's claims of election fraud. Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan is my guest. And Florida police with guns drawn raided the home of a former coronavirus data scientist to accuse the state of a cover-up. What is going on?
Really don't have much of that coming our way, at least not in the next couple of days. As a matter of fact, we are all well above freezing right now. Here's what it looks like in Sioux Falls, still in the 40s, 44 degrees. Remember, our normal high temperature this time of the year is 30 degrees, so we are certainly still well above that, even though the sun has been down for a couple of hours now.
It's been 5 weeks since Election Day, but President Trump and many of his allies continue to question state election results, despite there being zero evidence of widespread voter fraud or irregularities. William Brangham reports on another milestone day in the 2020 election.
Judy, on next Monday, members of the Electoral College will meet in state capitals across the country to cast their votes officially for president. Most of those electors and how they will vote are already known to us because today is what's called the safe harbor deadline for those appointments. To look at where we are in the transition right now, as well as the president's continued resistance to it, I'm joined by Trevor Potter. He is the president of the Campaign Legal Center. He served as general counsel for John McCain's presidential campaign, and he was also the chair of the Federal Election Commission. Trevor Potter, great to have you back on the News Hour. Before we get to these calendar issues that I was describing before, we still are seeing continued legal efforts by the Trump campaign to stop different states from certifying their votes. We saw the Supreme Court knock one down just today from Pennsylvania. There was a new one filed also by the Attorney General in Texas. What do you make of these remaining lawsuits?
Well, truthfully, they're increasingly bizarre in the sense that they have no chance of stopping the Electoral College from voting and I think from Congress accepting those results. So they're They're best described as PR messages, maybe heartfelt by the people filing them, but I don't expect them to have any legal effect.
So as I mentioned, today is the safe harbor deadline. Again, just remind us what that means in the process of moving from the election to a new president being sworn in.
It's a date set by Congress that says if states get their electors in by that date, if they certify them by that date, then presumptively Congress will accept them. It's not a guarantee, but it is part of the timeline leading up to the voting by the electors on the 14th, next Monday.
So is it your sense that there is anything that could legitimately interrupt this process from this week to next week to January?
In terms of the outcome, no, there is nothing that would legitimately interrupt that process. The states have already certified their electors, and the electors will meet next Monday, the 14th, and vote, and Congress will receive those votes on January 6th. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean there won't be noise in the process. I just mean the end result is now very clear. Some of the noise is the filing of these lawsuits, trying to get the Supreme Court to intervene and tell states not to designate electors, or telling Congress somehow not to count them, which is something the courts can't do, but what this is trying to do.
Pulling back a little bit and looking more broadly, what do you make of this effort that the president is undertaking to declare that the election was a fraud, that votes were stolen from him, that he in fact won, not Joe Biden winning this pretty decisive electoral victory? Is it your sense that this is just a man who doesn't want to concede and we're seeing the sort of tail end of that spasm, or is this something more substantive going on?
Well, I think what's going on has changed over the course of the last month since the election. Originally, it was a question of, are the votes being counted correctly? Are the votes that are being counted legitimate? Have they been examined? Are the machines reporting the right tally? That was then followed by a series of lawsuits that were, I think, increasingly far-fetched, alleging that somehow the system the states had used was wrong, and that a court ought to step in and say that, for instance, absentee ballots shouldn't be counted in Pennsylvania. But all of that is now resolved. Those court cases are almost all over. The Trump campaign lost in every case. So the question becomes, what is President Trump doing, still saying that the election was somehow being stolen, that it was fraudulent? And I think at that stage you have to say either he's being incredibly reckless in terms of refusing to accept that this is how people voted, this is what the Electoral College vote is, or something more dangerous, which is he's refusing to accept the result of the election personally and politically, because it helps him to be seen to keep fighting, to raise money for his new political committee. At some stage, it becomes just an attempt to undermine the president-elect and to make Americans think that the result of this election is somehow not legitimate. And that's really dangerous for our democracy. This year, it's not particularly close. There's a big Biden lead in the Electoral College and the popular vote. But next time, it might be really close and come down to one state. And in those circumstances, the idea that state legislatures should step in and ignore what the voters did and decide they're going to produce a different result because they don't like what the voters did is incredibly anti-democratic. It is not how a democracy elects its leaders.
All right.
Television set, and you'll see what happened.
showdown in Georgia for Senate control.
Georgia will determine the balance of power in a heated runoff election.
The outcome of that Senate race is going to set the stage and the tone.
As the future of our country hangs in the balance, Fox News is standing up for what's right.
Liberal elites are going all in Georgia.
Democrats aren't hiding what they plan to do. They plan to fundamentally change this country. The dream of a blue wave, it ends in Georgia.
Stay with Fox News Channel for coverage of the Senate showdown. The Voices America trusts. This program is sponsored by Novartis.
Two former Ku Klux Klansmen for the 1963 bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham. Meanwhile, civil rights leaders met with Biden today, where NAACP President Derek Johnson called on Biden to create a new position, National Advisor on Racial Justice, Equity, and Advancement. And I'm joined now by Derek Johnson, National President and CEO of the NAACP, and Paul Butler, Georgetown law professor and former federal prosecutor. Gentlemen, thank you both very much for being here this evening. Well, President Johnson, I have to ask you, tell me about this National Advisor on Racial Justice, Equity, and Advancement. Who is that person? What do you want that person to be charged with, in charge of?
Well, first of all, I want to congratulate you on your show. I can watch to see how to tie my tie moving forward. You know, if you look at corporate America, many of them who take diversity serious, they have established diversity and inclusion officers. These are individuals who sit in a C-suite, report to the president, because corporations understand the value of their diverse customer base. If we want to look at the opportunity of diversity for the future, we need someone to hold true the commitments that President-elect Biden has said he want to do in terms of racial equality. We only get what we measure. What we measure must be accountable, and you have to have somebody to oversee that. He laid out a big vision during his campaign. He laid out a big vision in his victory speech. Now we want to make sure there is someone charged with the responsibility of carrying it out.
And so, well, give us a flavor of what this meeting was like.
Well, I think it was a very positive meeting. It was open. It was long overdue. It was an opportunity for us to share and listen about the direction of this administration. As the civil rights community have long wanted to address what we've seen over the last 4 years, it was our opportunity to talk about how we can be partners in making democracy work for everyone. And that's what's most important here.
And you just said that you were there to listen. So, well, one, what did you hear? And two, actually, did you like what you heard from the administration? Because as I said in the intro, NBC was reporting that civil rights leaders were not happy that they had not met with the president-elect since the election.
But that's absolutely, that's concerning. You know, NAACP, we're the nation's oldest civil rights organization, we're the nation's largest civil rights organization. We are 4 weeks out before having the meeting. But that being said, we also understand the value of setting the table for inclusion around a new administration as we look forward. Now we have an opportunity with the commitment from this administration to have ongoing dialogue to talk about how we can make democracy work, how we can open up opportunities, and how we can overcome historical barriers that have prevented obstacles to so many individuals to truly live up to their potential.
Mm-hmm. Paul, let's talk about the potential of Doug Jones, the outgoing Democratic senator from Alabama, being the next attorney general. His name is in the mix, as is Merrick Garland, the district judge, appeals court judge here in Washington, who was basically denied a Supreme Court seat, and also Sally Yates, the former deputy attorney general. What do you make of these people who are being considered?
Yeah, so first off, Jonathan, congratulations to you. I'm so happy for you
Paul.
And for viewers. The next Attorney General needs expertise in public corruption to decide whether Donald Trump and his co-conspirators should be prosecuted, and expertise in racial justice, which President-elect Biden has said is one of his core commitments. So Doug Jones prosecuted the Ku Klux Klan terrorists who bombed the Birmingham church. We need to know more about his civil rights agenda, how, for example, he or Sally Yates or Merrick Garland would address the GOP attack on voting rights, how vigorously they would resume the federal investigations of police departments that Barr and Trump have brought to a stop, how they would push back against the endless attacks on affirmative action and diversity and inclusion efforts. So other prominent names have demonstrated experience. Deval Patrick, Tom Perez, Vanita Gupta all ran the Civil Rights Division. I think if President-elect Biden does choose one of these other folks, the number two, the deputy, must have expertise in civil rights.
Real quickly, President Johnson, I know you're not too thrilled about the idea of Doug Jones.
Well, I want to make sure whoever it takes to have the Department of Justice understand how on day one to execute a plan. The issues that we are confronting here are too serious for someone to have on-the-job training. And I don't know enough about Doug Jones' experience with DOJ. I do know there are qualified individuals who could walk in the door day one, garner the confidence of the career staff, understand where all the bathrooms are, and execute a plan to not only protect civil rights, address corruption, address the violation of our election system, address some of the antitrust legislation that we must address, because it is too vital for us to take 6 months to learn on the job. There's too much work to do.
For Joe Biden, if there's no change in that situation, which it appears now there will not be. The other arm of it is for future elections and whether or not the changes that were made were unconstitutional. Do you think that given that struggle between state legislature and state Supreme Court over who controls the voting rules in the state, that the Supreme Court will take that up?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to define what we're talking about here. We're talking about Act 77. It's Pennsylvania's no excuse absentee law. And what we argue is that Act 77 is fundamentally unconstitutional. So why is it unconstitutional? Because in order to change the time, place, and manner of an election in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, it requires a back-to-back vote in the General Assembly. Martha, that did not happen. It needs to be advertised in 2 newspapers in every county in the state for 3 months. That did not happen. And this is the most important part, it needs to be put on the ballot in a referendum so that the people of our great Commonwealth have a say in how we conduct elections here. And I believe that that is what the PA framers of our Constitution intended. So, I think, we are in the midst of a great constitutional crisis here, and we're seeking remedy from the Supreme Court to help us find a solution. Because even if the court says that, yes, 2020 was messed up, but let's fix it moving forward, you're still going to have 50% of the people in the state saying, wait a second, the election in 2020 was unconstitutional and illegal, and we'll forever have an asterisk next to the 2020 election if they decide that. But by contrast, if the court decides that, and this is how the media likes to frame it, that we're trying to throw out 2.5 million mail-in ballots, well, that's also explosive, and we don't like that solution either. So we're seeking that, we're trying to find a remedy and going to the courts for their help, because Act 77 is facially unconstitutional, and we're in the fight to make sure that the great people of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania have faith in how our elections are conducted. Because, Martha, right now, 50% of the people in this state have no faith, and we need to make sure that we're fighting for everybody. This isn't just about Republicans, by the way, because at some point, Democrats might find themselves on the receiving end of a Republican governor, passing unconstitutional laws, and we don't want that to happen either. It's important that our elections are conducted by the Constitution.
I think you're right. I think when you take a step back, you want to look at the way the law is made and whether or not the legislature can be overridden by the Supreme Court based on the rules that you are talking about. So changing voting rules in a state is not something that can be done ex Constitution. So, Congressman Kelly, what do you think happens next? Do you think that based on that part that the Supreme Court is likely to pick this up? They gave absolutely no explanation for today's decision. It was just a direct decision without any writing along with it. So it's tough to read the tea leaves.
Well, it is tough to read the tea leaves, but I think what Sean just laid out, what that really comes down to, was this done constitutionally or unconstitutionally when it comes to changing the voter laws? If you want to change it, you can do that. But it's an amendment to our Constitution. This is not what took place. So now, first of all, Commonwealth Court ruled in our favor, saying, I think there's merit to this case, and it needs to be heard. Then the Pennsylvania Supreme Court comes in and does something that's totally politically motivated and says, no, we're not even going to hear it. You guys had no business coming here. You waited too long to come. And if you had come early, you wouldn't have had any reason to complain about this because you weren't harmed. And if you come too late, well, you came too late. That is absolutely insane, and that is a phony accusation to make. What we're looking for is the constitutionality of what took place in Pennsylvania versus the unconstitutionality of it. If you want to make an amendment to our Constitution, there's a way to do it. Sean just laid out some of the things that have to take place. What we are looking for is for the Supreme Court to take a look at the merits of our case that's strictly based on the Constitution or going outside the Constitution. And if you're going to go outside the Constitution, you can't sit there and talk about when you guys are too late. There is, by the way, no limit on when you can challenge that. So they're throwing out something that they can't be thrown out. I'm talking about Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Okay. I am hoping, along with Sean and with the other petitioners, that the Supreme Court of the United States looks at this case on its merits. On its merits. That's basically what we're talking about here. And we're not alleged.
Bargain liquid. We have people who are homeless. We have people who don't even know where they're going to live next month. We have black businesses that are disenfranchised. We have people who need stimulus checks yet. And I thank God for you and all of media. But we still have to deal with this ugly, racist thing called human beings actually.
I mean,
speaking to one another like this.
It takes a lot of courage for you to speak out about this. You know, I can understand if you would be afraid receiving messages like that. Many would be. Are you worried anyone may try to act on those vile threats?
Absolutely not. I'm not afraid of those threats. What I have found is that many of these cowards are just that, cowards. They speak behind the computer, or they'll call me, and if I happen to pick up, most of them will hang up. So to ask me if I'm afraid, I thank you for that question. I appreciate that. And for all the well-wishers, I am fine. I want to tell you that, but God has another plan for all of this country. Yes. And I'm hoping that this will be the time that racism will really be addressed.
Well, you are not afraid, and I appreciate that, and I hope that many are inspired by the courage it takes in speaking out in the face of this. Representative, thank you so very much for your...
And like most self-centered people, they have no perspective on the rest of the world. If you listen to our strictly moderated national conversation, you would think the single greatest crisis this country faces is the passing of a convicted felon from Minneapolis called George Floyd. That's our main challenge. They literally told us that for months. So America's frame of reference has shrunk to the point that we can only see ourselves. And of course the rest of the world knows that. They've been watching carefully, especially China. China knows that our self-involvement is their opportunity. Well, our elites have been busy lecturing us about white fragility and trans rights. The Chinese government has remained deadly serious. Chinese leaders aren't frivolous and stupid like our leaders are. They don't care what pronouns you use. They don't hire people because of the way they look. They have a goal, a very specific goal. They're highly focused on it. That goal is knocking us from our perch. That goal is winning. And they are. Over the past decade, China has made stunning progress in its attempt to dethrone the United States from its position of global leadership, our position. China's economy will soon surpass ours in size. And at some point, so will its military strength. To accelerate this, the Chinese Communist Party has engaged in a ceaseless effort to subvert our leadership class, the people who run the United States. And that has worked more effectively than anyone imagined. Last night we showed you proof. We played a clip of a Chinese professor speaking on camera in front of a live audience, explaining how deeply his country's intelligence services have penetrated our government and our business establishments. This video was recorded just over a week ago. Watch the subtitles at the bottom of the screen.
以前1992年到2016年之间，中美之间各种问题都能搞得定，因为咱们上边有人， 就是我们在美国的权势核心圈啊，我们有我们的老朋友。
We have people at the top of America's core inner circle of power and influence.
Against his impending loss of power, whose last best hope may have been the Supreme Court, although they wanted nothing to do with it. Remember, he was pretty explicit about wanting Amy Coney Barrett on the court in order to help him steal the election if need be. But today, neither Coney Barrett nor any other justice seem willing to play along. The court today rejecting Republican efforts to overturn the results in Pennsylvania in a one-sentence order which did not suggest any dissent among the court's 9 justices. Of course, it was an extremely weak case, so take that as you will. But as Trump starts to fade from the scene, as his challenges get laughed out of court, and his rhetoric grows more and more desperate and irrelevant, the problem of Trump, the problem he represents, is only coming into clearer focus. Because Donald Trump was always a product of the GOP base, a person who channeled their most feral instincts in order to gain power. They matched his own feral instincts. But he didn't create that base. He didn't create the energy within it. And as he himself recedes from view, recedes from our attention, we are seeing just how deep the rot is inside the Republican Party. The modern GOP isn't just detached from reality. Much of it is willfully opposed to popular sovereignty and democracy. Many of its leaders are continuing to pursue dangerous delusions that are right now, day after day, hour after hour, indeed minute after minute, getting people killed. In Arizona, this is just a tour of Republican activity over the last few days. The chair of the state party, Kelly Ward, she's somewhat infamous. Mitch McConnell famously called her Chemtrail Kelly. Kelly Ward, who now runs the party in Arizona with the support of many of her GOP colleagues, told the state's Republican governor to shut the hell up after he suggested the election wasn't stolen. And the Arizona Republican Party's official Twitter account is calling for people to die for Trump's cause. Tweeting someone with the Twitter name Stop the Steal, who said he is willing to give his life for this fight, and adding he is, are you? In South Dakota, where 1 in every 68 people in the state tested positive in just the past 2 weeks, that Republican governor, Kristi Noem, is effectively ignoring the virus, opting this weekend to travel to Texas, to leave her state to ride a horse and hoist a flag at a rodeo. As if it's 2019 and there's no pandemic at all. As if people aren't dying by the dozen every day in her state, as if it doesn't have one of the highest per capita death rates in the world right now. In Texas, the Republican Attorney General there, Ken Paxton, who's currently under investigation and has multiple former staffers filing whistleblower complaints about illegal activity. These are former diehard conservative Republican staffers of his who say the guy is not on the level. That guy, Ken Paxton, who you see there, he is now suing 4 states that didn't vote the way he liked, seeking to have the Supreme Court block them from voting in the Electoral College. Basically, Texas just saying to Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, you voted the wrong way. You don't get to vote for president. That's the official position of the Texas AG. This kind of thing is widespread. Numerous state legislators have called on Republicans in Congress not to accept their own state's electors. 64 of them in Pennsylvania, writing a letter asking their congressional delegation to throw out their own state's electoral votes. Think about that. Those are the same votes that got them elected. It's the same people voting in the same election that gets all these people. Just today, a Republican congressman named Alex Mooney sought to condemn the handful of elected Republicans with the temerity to acknowledge that Donald Trump lost. And here's the thing, it's not just backbenchers and it's not just the sort of most extreme members of the caucus. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, Senator Roy Blunt, House Republican Leader Kevin McCarthy today blocked the inaugural committee from recognizing Biden's win. Senator Ron Johnson, we know him well, he used his chairmanship of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee for a dangerous circus act today, inviting an anti-vaxxer and others who reject mainstream science to join him in spewing dangerous nonsense to the public as the pandemic kills and kills and kills some more.
It's certainly worse than the flu, but is it that much worse? I think the root cause of our problem is just closed minds.
Is it that much worse than the flu? In a bad flu year, we lose 60,000 people. We're knocking on the door of 300,000. So, yeah, it's the deadliest year in American history. More than 2,200 Americans are dying of the virus every day. 130 Americans died in just the 90 minutes of disinformation that Ron Johnson hosted on the Hill today. But that's the thing. All those people I listed, Kelly Ward, Ken Paxton, Ron Johnson, Roy Blunt, Mitch McConnell, none of them are Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not the issue. Everyone wants to pretend that it's Donald Trump. Donald Trump's the problem. He's intimidating these people. That's a misunderstanding. The issue, the problem, is not going to go away when he does. And also, he's not going to go away because he's Donald Trump. But this is it. This is, I mean, as we head into the Biden era, in the midst of the worst winter of our lives, in the midst of the pandemic, the #1 challenge to American democracy right now is what to do about this faction of the country. What to do about a faction of the country that seems intent on destroying everything in their path. What the majority of the country can do about it. Senator Chris,
did you have a sense of how the president was going to respond to that?
So, you know, again, I don't think we really considered what the reaction was going to be from the president or the candidate. What we did was the right thing, and just like, you know, filing this lawsuit, the way I look at it is, you know, I kind of have a pattern of standing up for what's right. I'm standing up for myself, my family, my friends, my teammates, standing up for democracy, and there are costs associated with that, but you got to take a stand at some point. You got to take a stand and stand up for what's right. And so then I stood up for democracy, got fired for it, continued standing up and defending democracy, got death threats, and now we're standing up again for democracy and filing this lawsuit.
You know, the president spent time today talking about the election, saying, you know, let's see whether or not somebody has the courage, whether it's legislators or legislatures or justice of the Supreme Court or a number of justices of the Supreme Court. Let's see if they have the courage to do what everybody in this country knows is right. After what you went through and are still going through, I'm wondering what do you make of that choice of language?
You know, this is part of what we would like to look into a little bit further. You know, whatever the reason is, whether he honestly believes that he won, which I can't conceive how any rational person would conclude that, or it's an ongoing fundraising effort to retire debt or fund future political opportunities, or, you know, maybe he's not a gracious loser. It doesn't matter. And contrary to, I think, what Jim Acosta said earlier, or at least the advisor said, yes, democracy held strong, but I still am a firm believer that democracy is fragile, and to have these sorts of internal attacks, these internal domestic threats, is incredibly dangerous. And no, we cannot have another 4 years of some kind of lost cause effort. We have to put this to rest. We have to move forward as a country.
The lawsuit you filed today against the Trump campaign and the attorney Joseph DeGeneva, who's working with the campaign to try to overturn the results, accuses them of defamation. DeGeneva went on Newsmax the day after your 60 Minutes interview and suggested that you be executed. He later said his remarks were sarcastic, made in jest. Can you talk a little bit about what you felt compelled to do? I mean, why you felt compelled to take legal action?
So look, I was a public servant in the national security community defending democracy, and he accused me of being a traitor. You know, the penalty for treason is exactly what he described, and that's exactly how it was interpreted by the community, by everyone out there in social media. That's, you know, the number of death threats just went off the charts, and you cannot unring that bell in this this intense, toxic political environment. Just look at the threats against Governor Whitmer and Governor Northam here. You know, once you start agitating and really pouring kerosene on the fire, it's really hard to put that out. And so, again, it's important for me to stand up for me and stand up for my family.
Well, according to your lawsuit, your 10-year-old child asked at one point whether you were going to be executed. I mean, just as a new dad, I can't imagine how do you deal with that?
I'm not sure you can, right? Those things are hard. You know, I listened to the Michigan Congresswoman, how she's doing great, and I love hearing that. But when you have family members that are brought into this and are collateral damage effectively from these sorts of these attacks on your character and on your person, I don't take that lightly. That is not acceptable behavior. That is not how people should act in a civil society. It has to stop.
How do things change? I mean, I'm still stunned after all the shamelessness we have seen over the last 4 years, after all the lies. I'm just stunned at how the president turns on people who worked very hard for the good of the country. I'm talking about you and others who, you know, even Jeff Sessions, who, you know, one can argue with politically if you disagree with him politically, but he was executing the president's agenda in terms of what, you know, judges and all the things that the president wanted. He just didn't recuse himself. He just recused himself, which is the right thing to do. Just the degree to which this president will turn on people, and it seems like his base and a lot of people in the Republican Party, I don't know if it's that they're scared, it's like a bully, they're scared of the bully turning on them, so they're, you know, praising the bully, but something's got to give just moving forward.
So you've heard from, whether it's off the record or background conversations, from Republicans where they say that it's political suicide to go against the president. And, you know, I guess I can understand that. For me, it's not, that's not good enough. I took a stand. We defended democracy. I'd do it 1,000 times over. And in fact, I've said it, that I, you know, it was an honor to serve in the role as the director of CISA. But to your larger point, this has to stop. And short of the president acknowledging that he did not win, that the Vice President Biden is the president-elect, you know, that's a good first start. I don't have a lot of faith that it's going to happen because I think there are other things they're trying to accomplish here. But the rest of the Republican Party and the leadership has to stand up. There are 3 branches of government. The legislature has to stand up and accept the outcome of this election, because certainly, particularly in the House, they're accepting their own races. Every single one of them was on the ballot. They're accepting theirs. I don't see them, you know, questioning fraud in their own races. We got to move on. They've got to stand up. We've got to move forward.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny how fraud is always in somebody else's race, not the race that you have won in one's district. Christopher Krebs, thank you for your service, and thank you for talking tonight. I really appreciate it. Good luck to you.
Thanks, Anders.
Next, more reaction from members.